I woke up at 2 in the afternoon. I went home last night and I slept, and then when I woke up it was 2 in the afternoon. So finally I'm rested and happy, because I've been traveling for the last week. But last night I was feeling so excited and so happy to see all your faces, because I went to bed last night thinking over and over again, I said, this is the world, because I keep thinking that the world is really, if you mix it up, they said if you mix up the world, it will be Chinese and Indian. That's what they say, because you mix the whole world, it'll be Chinese and Indian, because half the world is Chinese or Indian. So this is what the world will look like in the future. It will look like Singapore, because you have Chinese and Indian, a little more Chinese than Indian, which the world is like that. And the world is transforming so rapidly and prospering so much in so many different ways. And when I see this country of Singapore and what the people have done, it really excites me to be here. And I know that the faith is going to do wonderful things in this part of the world. And I'm looking forward to Malaysia. I didn't know it was a trouble. You said it was a trouble to go to Malaysia? Why is that?
For me.
Oh, okay. But I'm looking forward to Malaysia as well, and I'm so excited to be here. And also because Elanco just wrote all these titles on a piece of paper, and so I have to every day look at and work out what to say, because I don't know where you got these titles from. Where did you get them from?
Previous discussion about summer school.
I had some discussion with a summer school with Holland a year ago. Is that right?
Yes, right.
They wanted certain subjects, and I was going back and forth and back and forth. And finally, they picked some other subjects. But when I was consulting with them, I was sending various ideas or titles. And Elanco got a copy of them a year ago. And so now I come here, and he has all these titles that I didn't have preparation for. But I'm glad that you did that, because this is a very interesting subject, the operation of spiritual forces. What does that mean? Does anyone know what that means? No? So we're going to have to talk about it, because the phrase spiritual forces occurs many, many times in recent messages of the Universal House of Justice. Before I do that, though, I want to mention a few things that you can do as part of the 5-year plan. Because we talked about the 5-year plan yesterday in the afternoon, I think the mornings and the afternoon, and I couldn't finish it because it takes about 6 lectures or something to finish it. Maybe when I get to Malaysia we can cover the 5-year plan. But there was a letter that came from the Universal House of Justice in 2001 to a group of Baha'is, and they listed 6 things that any one of us can do in relation to the 5-year plan. A lot of us, we've been Baha'is maybe before 1996, and we thought that the faith did this and that, and now suddenly we're channeled to do other things. But they said that you have the capacity to serve as and prepare others to be, and then they listed 6 things. So really, they're saying 12 things. Would you agree? Because you have the capacity to do any one of these 6 that I'm about to tell you, but you also need to prepare others to do it. Now, what does that relate to that I spoke to yesterday? What principle does this prepare others relate to that I talked about yesterday? Does anyone remember? Do you remember I talked about geometric growth? That geometric growth means that you have to be duplicating, self-duplicating all the time. So the House of Justice is pointing out that don't just go out and do something and keep that job for yourself. You should do that thing, and at the same time, you need to be preparing and helping others to do that same thing. You're not going to keep that job yourself. And if we do this, then those people will also do that. So it'll go 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So every one of you must be doing these things and also preparing another. In other words, you can't just give somebody a fish. You also have to teach them how to fish themselves so that they can then do the same. So let's look at this list, and then we'll go on to the subject tonight. The first thing they say that you can do is to be an educator of children. An educator of children. This is the first one on their list. How many of you are engaged in the spiritual education of children? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 of you engaged in the spiritual education of children. How many of those 5 you're working and preparing others to do what you're doing as well? Any of you? Raise your hand if you are. You're also doing that. So, those of you that raised your hand that are not, keep doing it, but also try and get others to do it. Now, those of you that didn't raise your hand, this is a great field of service. In fact, there is nothing you can do more for the future of mankind than to educate children. Because remember I said yesterday, there's an old saying, it says, the younger you teach, the further you reach. Do you understand why that is, the younger you teach? Because if you teach children, you're teaching further into the future. Now, it's not really an old saying, I made it up, okay? It's not really an old saying, but I think it should be an old saying. And this is the fastest way we can transform human civilization, but only if we give spiritual education to children, because human beings are spiritual beings, and they're getting primarily material education. And we don't know what the potential of mankind is until we give them spiritual education. So I really ask any one of you, if you want to teach, how many of you like to teach adults rather than children? Who prefers to teach adults instead of children? Anybody? No? How many like to teach children instead of adults? Okay. Let me let you in a little secret. When you're teaching children, you are teaching adults. That's the most important thing to remember. When you're teaching children, you're teaching adults. You're teaching adults of the future, because every child will become an adult. It's just easier to teach the adults of the future than it is the adults of the present. It's easier to teach them, but they're going to be adults. And before you know it, they're going to be adults. How many of you have children that are now in their 20s? Do anyone have children? Is it amazing how quick you just turn your head one day and they're grown up? So that's what's going to happen. Another thing I noticed in the Antas, Baha'u'llah says that children should leave in their will money to their teacher. Did you know that?
Yes.
Okay, why would, usually you leave money to your family, or you leave money, so that may be an inducement too, maybe I'm just saying, if you're not sure about it. But this is the first thing the house said to do. Start educating children, because we are educating the future of the world by educating children. Second thing they said you could be is an animator of junior youth. Now, you know we have this program of junior youth, which the House of Justice only began about 4 or 5 years after the process started in 2006. Originally, the core activities were children and devotional gatherings and study circles. Is that right? And what else? All it was at first. And then they added this junior youth. So the junior youth came in a little later, and the House of Justice said this period, this group, between 12 and 13, about 15, is a special period in the life of individuals. How many of you know children at that age that they could either go here or here? It's just like, it's the fork in the road of life. And they say they have special needs and special materials and special methods. In other words, teaching has to be different to them. And so the House of Justice is trying very hard to get us to focus on them. And this is a generation of youth that are largely being forgotten in the world. In America, they're totally being forgotten. And so they end up, doing all kinds of crazy things and so on. And now we're focusing on that. Who in this room is an animator of junior youth? No, none, nobody yet. Oh yes, 1 or 2. Oh, and you're both young, right? Did you go to the youth conference that they recently? And so, of course, the House of Justice has encouraged the youth to be animators of junior youth. You know that. Because why is that? Because junior youth look up to youth very much. Also, I think the House of Justice knows that the easiest way to teach somebody is not to tell them something, but to have them teach somebody else. When you teach somebody else, you end up learning more than if you are the student. So the House of Justice knows that junior youth will get education, and youth will also get education too. So you're going to benefit. In fact, Abdu'l-Baha said that the benefit to a teacher is 10 to 1 in relation to the student. So when you go and teach, you think you're giving? No, you're receiving 10 times as much. I really encourage all of you to try and be animators of junior youth, even if you're not a youth, whatever age you are, because you will find in your communities, junior youth are easier to attract and to teach than adults. Adults are kind of fixed in their way, so you could find those that are not Baha'is, and you could go around and talk to them and say, would you like to come to a class on spiritual education, spiritual empowerment? You'll find that you'll get them to come, and they'll bring their friends and so on, and it's a whole lot of fun. The third, they say, is you can be teachers of the faith. That's the third thing the House of Justice says, teachers of the faith. Oh, by the way, the two that raised your hand, are you trying to prepare others to be animators of junior youth? You are? You have in your mind those other people? Oh, you're pointing to somebody. Okay. In other words, do that, because if you do it, and then, you see, the point of this whole 5-year plan is if somebody arises to do it and duplicates themselves, you're starting a living process. Because then they will duplicate, and they will duplicate, and there'll be 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. But it's important that you don't hold the job. I know in some parts of the world, people say, certain people are doing the work, and they don't want others to do their job. Okay, this is a natural human tendency, isn't that right? They don't want others to do their job. And this is not the way we are in the faith. We want everybody to do our job. Okay, because in other words, we want to train others. The third is teachers of the faith. And I'm sure how many of you are teachers of the faith? You raise your hand. Okay. Everybody should be teachers of the faith. And maybe we'll talk about how we can do that. The fourth, they say, are tutors of study circles. How many here are tutors of study circles? Okay, so we need to look at that very much. These are, any one of these 6 things I mentioned, you should say to myself, I am going to give that to Baha'u'llah because I'm going to answer his call. The fifth, he says, they say, are participants in elevated discourse. Participants in elevated discourse. This is a new concept which the House of Justice has been promoting in the last several years. That in the world there are people talking and discussing things of very important matters. Matters related to politics and social and economic development and the environment and peace. You understand all of these things? And the Baha'is need to participate in that discourse. Here in Singapore, I'm sure there are many forums or activities or conferences or other organizations that are involved in elevated discourse, maybe the equality of men and women, or is that right? Yes. Baha'is need to start participating in that, going to those meetings, discussing, pointing out their Baha'i, listening to those people. In other words, they don't say speakers to those people, they say participants in discourse. In other words, you need to go and listen as well. And if Baha'is don't start participating in the discussion and areas, a lot of people are discussing all kinds of things. And some is good, and some is bad, and some is silly, and some is stupid, and so on. We need to participate in what the world is discussing that is of benefit. And then we can gradually bring in our Baha'i teachings. And the last, they say, is initiators of social action. Initiators of social action. In other words, there are certain things that are needed in the world. It doesn't have to be, a grand thing where you solve, all the poverty of Africa or something like that. But here in Singapore, is there some social action that you can do? Something that's good? I know in Singapore, the government is very efficient. But still, there might be other organizations, maybe to help the poor, maybe to clean up the environment, maybe to, all kinds of things. This is also something you can do. If you don't want to do one of the others, this you can do. The House of Justice says, choose one of these. Choose one of these. To be an educator of children, to be an animator of junior youth, to be a teacher of the faith, to be a tutor of study circles, to participate in elevated discourse, or to initiate social action. Do one of those 6 and prepare others, and you will be answering the call of Baha'u'llah in this day. And they say the only thing that's needed, and I'm going to read it, is concerted, persistent, sacrificial action. Cycle after cycle, cluster after cluster, by an ever-swelling number of consecrated individuals. So all they're asking is you do one of these things, prepare others to do it, and persist in it. And then, if you do this, they say that some kind of power will come to you. And that's tonight's talk. They refer to the concept of spiritual forces that are available to you. How many of you like science fiction movies like, say, Star Wars, where he says, "May the Force be with you," or he has a lightsaber, or Harry Potter, they have magical powers. Do you like those kind of things? When someone has or even the old stories where you have a genie, or you rub the bottle and there's magic powers. Do you like this idea? Well, you're going to get it more in the Baha'i faith than you're going to get it anywhere else. For some reason, we are told over and over again that there are certain forces in the world that are available to us, and they are not physical forces, they're spiritual forces. This comes, first of all, from a statement of Al-Baha. I'm going to read it. not too long, in which he was talking to the Baha'is in the United States. And they asked him about the progress of the world materially, which was really advancing in 1912. It's amazing to think how the world had changed in 1912 with electricity and automobiles and even air flight, had begun by 1912. And so they asked him, will spiritual progress of the world keep pace with material progress in the future? That was the question they asked Abdu'l-Baha, because material progress was going quite rapidly. Now, how many of you think that material progress has continued since 1912? Scientific and so on. There's been an enormous growth in material and scientific progress. How many of you think that spiritually we have grown equally in the last 100 years to our spiritual growth? Who thinks no? How many think we've actually maybe gone the other way? Maybe it's definitely true. So they asked this question about Abdu'l-Baha. And Abdu'l-Baha said this. He said, in a living organism, the full measure of its development is not known or realized at the time of its inception or birth. So he says, sometimes when something is first born, its full potential is not known. And this is quite clear, we know this. He said, development and progression imply gradual stages or degrees. For example, spiritual advancement may be likened to the light of the early dawn. Although the dawn light is dim and pale, a wise man who views the march of the sunrise at its very beginning can foretell the ascendancy of the sun in its full glory and effulgence. He knows for a certainty that it is the beginning of its manifestation, and that later it will assume great power and potency. So he's saying that at the dawn, at the very early, what we call the crack of dawn, right? He says a wise person knows that the sun is heading towards that, but maybe the rest of the world it still seems like it's nighttime. Again, for example, if he takes a seed and observes that it is sprouting, he will know that assuredly it will ultimately become a tree. Now is the beginning of the manifestation of the spiritual power, and inevitably the potency of its life forces will assume greater and greater proportions. So we're going to see an advance in spiritual power. Therefore, this 20th century is the dawn or beginning of spiritual illumination, and it is evident that day by day it will advance. It will reach such a degree that spiritual effulgences will overcome the physical. Okay, so at some stage, spiritual forces will actually overcome the physical. Has that happened yet? Not in my opinion, but I'm not saying it will happen. Spiritual forces will overcome the physical so that divine susceptibilities will overpower material intelligence and the heavenly light dispel and banish earthly darkness. Divine healing shall purify all ills, and the cloud of mercy will pour down its rain. The sun of reality will shine, and all the earth shall put on its beautiful green carpet. Among the results of the manifestations of spiritual forces will be that the human world will adapt itself to a new social form. The justice of God will become manifest throughout human affairs, and human equality will be universally realized. So he's saying that spiritual forces are going to arise, and humanity will adapt itself to an entirely new social form. So in order to understand that there are spiritual forces that are just at dawn, and they're rising, and somehow we can tap into these, is a very important concept. How many of you have ever lived amongst roosters?
Amongst roosters?
Yeah, has anyone? Okay, I had to do this in New Guinea, and I hated those roosters. Let me explain to you why. I'm sleeping in a hut. It's like a hut. But the hut is very, you can hear everything outside. And it's completely dark, and you're sleeping. And suddenly, this rooster comes, okay? The rooster crows, and he could be right next to your hut, and then it shocks you to death. And you go outside, and it's completely black. It's completely black outside. It's just like nighttime, and the rooster crows. And you say, what is that rooster thinking? And then, just a few minutes later, you feel a little bit of dawn. and then it strikes. And I think to myself, how did the rooster know? You know, if you ever have that chance to do that, try to. I still to this day, I don't know how. Does anyone know how the rooster knows? I have no idea how he knows. Just the faintest little bit of dawn, he knows. And I used to say, you damn rooster, shut up, because he wakes you up. And I think that we Baha'is are the spiritual roosters. In other words, the time is going to come, Abdu'l-Baha says, when that sun is going to rise. But right now, it still seems completely dark. And only a few people see the rooster. But what does a rooster do? He warns, he tells everybody, he shouts out to everybody, the sun is rising. Even though they can't see it, the rooster can see it. We are the roosters. We're the spiritual. Yesterday I said we were kissing frogs, is that right? Yes. And then we're roosters. I'm sorry to use all these analogies. But in order to understand this slowly rising sun that Abdu'l-Baha says, we first need to understand the greatness of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Because Baha'u'llah's revelation is just dawning right now. It's just creeping around the horizon. But in 1,000 years, it's going to be, you know, the light will be in its noonday splendor. But right now, we don't realize how great it is. But maybe let's try and all become roosters. So I'm going to read a statement of Baha'u'llah. He says, I testify before God to the greatness, the inconceivable greatness of this revelation. Again and again, we have in most of our tablets borne witness to this truth, that mankind may be roused from its heedlessness. So this is a constant theme. Baha'u'llah says again and again in most of his tablets. So now if you look in any tablet of Baha'u'llah, probably he's going to try and get you to realize how great this is. Baha'u'llah says in another passage, in this most mighty revelation, all the dispensations of the past have attained their highest, their final consummation. So he's saying that every revelation of Moses, of Jesus, of Muhammad, of Buddha, Abraham, and all the others, all of them have attained their highest and final consummation. It's like Shoghi Effendi said yesterday, all of them were like a tree growing, and this was the fruit. Baha'u'llah says, that which hath been made manifest in this preeminent, this most exalted revelation, stands unparalleled in the annals of the past, nor will future ages witness its like. So he says, in the past there's never been anything like what Baha'u'llah brought, nor will the future everything. Is it amazing that we get to be the roosters of this revelation? That's amazing. The Bab referred to Baha'u'llah's revelation as a germ. He called it a germ. I'm glad he called it a germ and not me, because but he called it a germ. Now what is a germ? I'm sorry? A germ, yeah, but a germ is something that is very small. Like a seed is called a germ or something. A germ is something that is very small but has tremendous potential. And the Bab referred to the revelation of Baha'u'llah as a germ. I'm going to read it. He says, the germ that holds within itself the potentialities of the revelation that is to come. So that he's talking about the germ of Baha'u'llah. He says, the germ is endowed with a potency superior to the combined forces of all those who follow me. So, let's get this right. You know all the people that followed the Bab? 20,000, and have anyone read the Dawnbreakers? Yeah. Okay, he says all the power of the Dawnbreakers is not as much as the germ with the tiny part of Baha'u'llah. Is that amazing? Here's another one. The Bab says, of all the tributes I have paid to Baha'u'llah, he says, of all the tributes I have paid to him who is to come after me, the greatest is this. Okay, so the Bab says, of all the tributes I can pay to Baha'u'llah, the great. What do you think he's going to say? What do you think is his greatest tribute? Anyone want to guess? It's interesting, because he's the Bab, right? He's a manifestation of God. He can say, you know, he's got a lot of ability to say a lot of good things. Can you wonder what it is? What is the greatest tribute the Bab could pay to Baha'u'llah? Anyone want to guess? I'm sorry? That he would give his life for Baha'u'llah? And he did do that. What else? Okay, let me read it. He says, of all the tributes I have paid to him who is to come after me, the greatest is this. My written confession that no words of mine can adequately describe him. nor can any reference to him in my book do justice to his cause. So he says the greatest tribute is that I can't do it. My greatest tribute is that I can't give a tribute because no words of mine can adequately pay tribute. And that's the Bab. So, has anyone read any of the Bab's writings? They're very powerful, aren't they? And his writings are called the Bayan. There's one book called the Bayan, but his entire body of writings is also referred to the Bayan. So, if you read the Bayan, you think you'll get some truth? Here's what the Bab says. He says, 1,000 perusals of the Bayan. Has anyone read the Bayan 1,000 times? All the Bab's writing 1,000 times? No? You haven't? Okay, good. He says 1,000 perusals of the Bayan cannot equal the perusal of a single verse to be revealed by him whom God shall make manifest. You got the whole Bayan, everything the Bab read, which is a lot. It doesn't equal one verse of Baha'u'llah. Is that amazing what the Bab is saying? He says, today the Bayan is in the stage of a seed. At the beginning of the manifestation of him whom God shall make manifest, its ultimate perfection will become apparent. So, the point is that something is going on. And it's happened in 1853, and then it flourished in 1863. Something happened to the world that released spiritual forces into the world, and we want to understand this. Let me read you a statement from Baha'u'llah. He says, "This is the day whereon naught can be seen except the splendors of the light that shineth from the face of thy Lord the gracious. We have caused every soul to expire by virtue of our irresistible and all-subduing sovereignty. We have then called into being a new creation as a token of our grace unto men. I am verily the all-bountiful, the Ancient of Days." So he's saying he caused everything to expire, and then he recreated everything. That's what happened in 1863. Is that amazing? So if someone says, when did the world begin? You could say, well, actually, it began in 1863. You say, no, because we have evidence. No, that was another world. That one died. And a new world began. Isn't that amazing what he's saying? I want to read it again. He says, we have caused every soul to expire by virtue of our irresistible and all-subduing sovereignty. We have then called into being a new creation as a token of our grace. So, 1863, when Baha'u'llah declared his mission, was not just another appearance of another teacher from God. It was the complete ending of one world and the beginning of a new world. Okay, this is a very important concept. Now, Baha'u'llah talks about that day when he crossed the river. You know, he came out of his house in Baghdad, he crossed the river, and he announced in 1863. You know the house that he left, that he came out a few months ago was destroyed? Did you know that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but he talks about how he came out of that house, he went across the river, and he announced. I think it's interesting that that house was destroyed, because it's kind of like a symbol that the whole world ended and a new one began. But he talks about what we should do whenever we remember that day, the day when he crossed that river and did that. He says, rejoice with exceeding gladness. How many of you have exceeding gladness? So think about that day right now. Think about Baha'u'llah coming out of the house, crossing the river, and he's about to say something. Now give me your best exceeding gladness. Come on, I want to see it right now on your face. Okay, because Baha'u'llah's telling you to do that. He says, not just a bit of gladness, exceeding gladness. He says, rejoice with exceeding gladness, O people of Baha, as he called to remembrance the day of supreme felicity, the day whereon the tongue of the Ancient of Days hath spoken, as he departed from his house, proceeded to the spot from which he shed upon the whole creation the splendors of his name, the All-Merciful. God is our witness. Were we to reveal the hidden secrets of that day, all that dwell on earth and in the heavens would swoon away and die, except such as will be preserved by God the Almighty, the All-Knowing. Now we celebrate that day every year. How many of you have been to a celebration of the first day of Rizwan? Who's been to celebrate it? We celebrate that day, and Baha'u'llah commands us to celebrate with exceeding gladness. But when we celebrate that day, what do we do? Do we really know what happened on that first day of Rizwan of 1863? For example, when I go to Holy Day celebrations, first day of Rizwan celebrated, usually they tell us stories about how he went across the river, they piled up roses, the nightingales flew around, and he got on his horse. And is that this what you have? They always tell you the stories of the nightingales and the roses and the horse. Is that right? You had that over and over again. I think I've heard it's like the Baha'i Christmas story. Okay. So I think this is very interesting because this is what we celebrate. We celebrate, you know, a little historical story. So I found this interesting because the significance of Rizwan is quite different according to Abdu'l-Baha. Abdu'l-Baha was written a letter once by American Baha'is, and they wanted to celebrate Rizwan. They said, Abdu'l-Baha, will you send a letter so that we can read at Rizwan? Okay? And I'm going to read you Abdu'l-Baha's answer. He says, thou didst wish to celebrate the day of Rizwan with a feast, and to have those present on that day engage in reciting tablets with delight and joy. And thou didst request me to send thee a letter to be read on that day. My letter is this. And now he starts to write the letter. Now I'm thinking, okay, Abdu'l-Baha is going to tell the whole story of Baha'u'llah crossing the river, the tent, they're going to pitch the tent, they're going to put the roses, the nightingales. That's what I thought Abdu'l-Baha was going to say. Don't you think so? So let's read the letter that Abdu'l-Baha wrote to celebrate Rizwan. He said, O ye beloved, and ye handmaids of the merciful, this is the day when the day star of truth rose over the horizon of life. Okay, now, what is the horizon? The horizon is the point that separates earth and heaven. And below the horizon, if the sun is down there, it's complete darkness. So he says, this is the day when the sun of truth came up over the horizon. So, once again, he's using that horizon theory. He says, this is the day when the day star of truth rose over the horizon of life, and its glory spread, and its brightness shone out with such power that it clove the dense and high-piled clouds, and mounted the skies of the world in all its splendor. Hence do ye witness a new stirring throughout all created things. So he says, something happened, that the sun arose, and it dispelled something, whatever that something was. Some kind of clouds were dispelled. And now he says you see a new stirring throughout all created things. What was that new stirring that Abdu'l-Baha was talking about? What do you think it was? Let's read. He says, see how in this day the scope of sciences and arts hath widened out, and what wondrous technical advances have been made, and to what a high degree the mind's powers have increased, and what stupendous inventions have appeared. I'm thinking, Abdu'l-Baha, you're talking about Rizwan, but you're talking about technical advances in sciences and inventions. You think that's interesting that he would refer to that? And he continues, this age is indeed as 100 other ages. Should ye gather the yield of 100 ages, and set that against the accumulated product of our times, the yield of this one era will prove greater than that of 100 gone before. And we already talked about this before. We know that the scientific advances and discoveries in the last 100 years have been greater than 100 centuries before. Why did this just suddenly happen? Why did, out of nowhere, humanity, advances at a certain level, for 6,000 years of recording history, and then just suddenly, 100 years, it can do more than that. He says, take ye for example the sum total of all the books that were ever written in ages past, and compare that with the books and treatises that our era hath produced. These books, written in our day alone, far and away exceed the total number of volumes that have been written down the ages. See how powerful is the influence exerted by the day star of the world upon the inner essence of all created things. Now, the letter goes on, but at no point does Abdu'l-Baha ever get to the nightingales or the roses or the horses or anything else. All Abdu'l-Baha is talking about is, look what happened in the world, in the sciences and the arts and knowledge and education since that day in 1863. And I like to wonder, were human beings smart before 1863? Were they smart? Go back and read the writings of Plato and Aristotle and Pythagoras and Leonardo da Vinci and Isaac Newton, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Indians, the ancient Chinese. They were just as smart as you and I. But how come they didn't discover electricity? Can you figure that out? How come they didn't discover electromagnetism? How come they didn't discover nuclear power? How come they didn't discover all the things that we've discovered since that time? They were just as smart. Baha'u'llah says, in this day, and I'm reading from Baha'u'llah's tablets of Baha'u'llah, in this day the secrets of the earth are laid bare before the eyes of men. So, in other words, he unveiled the secrets of the earth to the eyes of men so that we're able to discover this. Now, Baha'u'llah says that his revelation is not just the gift of God to man. We often think that revelation is a gift of God to man. But also, the appearance of revelation is the infusion of capacity into man to receive that revelation. In other words, revelation has to do with the simultaneous gift of revelation with the infusion of capacity into the recipient. In other words, there's no way that I can give this revelation if I also don't give the recipient the ability to receive it. And the ability to receive it was given to mankind in 1863. And that's why we are seeing this. So mankind was recreated in 1863 in order to receive its revelation, but that recreation first we see manifested in the arts and the sciences. That's why we live in Singapore today and we have buildings with electricity and internet and airplanes. We have it because God recreated the world in 1863. Baha'u'llah says that, in Gleanings, he says that it was not only God that was manifested in 1863, it was also mankind was manifested in his full glory. Let me read this. He says, the potentialities inherent in the station of man, the full measure of his destiny on earth, the innate excellence of his reality, must all be manifested in this promised day of God. So it wasn't only God that was manifested, it was the potentialities of man that were manifested. And so we're seeing the potentialities of man right now in this day. Now, we're told that there are forces that Baha'u'llah released. Let's read about what those forces are. He says, through the movement of our pen of glory, we have, at the bidding of the omnipotent ordainer, breathed a new life into every human frame and instilled into every word a fresh potency. All created things proclaim the evidences of this worldwide regeneration. Now he says,